Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our session, and really appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to come and learn about innovation. And the topic of our panel today is Innovation Happens Everywhere, looking at intrapreneurship, not entrepreneurship, but intrapreneurship in established organizations. And my name is Brian Pierce. I'm a partner at EY and have the privilege of leading all of our entrepreneurship activities globally, including our Entrepreneur of the Year program. And what we have found in those entrepreneurship initiatives is that many of them involve connecting entrepreneurs outside to the needs of large corporations inside that are seeking to partner with entrepreneurs, acquire them, do licensing deals. They take various forms, but all with the goal of accessing external innovation to help these big companies continue to grow and to be relevant in the market when there's so many new technologies, new startups that are coming along and biting at their heels. So the point of our conversations today is going to be really, what do we mean between intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship? I was telling Dave Lenz earlier that I was skimming through my emails today and saw an email on this topic, and it said intrapreneurship, kind of the new key to corporate innovation. And I kind of went, well, I'm not sure how new it is, but the definition that they have was intrapreneurship is applying entrepreneurial processes and entrepreneurial mindset to solving internal challenges and problems, which I thought was actually a pretty nice, concise definition, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get in. So, as I say, I'm a partner at EY based in Boston. Have been with the firm for a long time, and really welcoming the opportunity to moderate with these three great panelists today. So, I'm going to ask each of them to give a brief introduction of themselves, and then we'll dive into a series of questions. We're going to stop asking questions at a point in time with the hope that you will have a lot of questions on your own, and all of us would much rather listen to your questions and respond to those than listen to ourselves talk. And so please be prepared with your questions. I'm just going to have you raise them from the audience. Hopefully I can hear you. I'm going to repeat the question because this is being videotaped and streamed. So hopefully I repeat or rephrase your question. And then at the end of it all, we'll wrap up, and we've got some great refreshments across the street, or across the hall rather, at Saxby's. So we'll be working from that. So with no further ado, on my immediate left is Elizabeth King, and then we'll go to Francine and Nikki. So brief introduction of yourselves and your history.
And I'll keep it short because, like we said, we want to get to your questions. My name's Elizabeth King. I am a 1979 political science graduate of the university. Probably have done my own intrapreneurship and trying to figure out my career because I've been in a technical role in IT for half of the time that I've been in a corporation, and half of the time as a human resources professional. So that seems like maybe an odd combination, but actually they work pretty well together. I was at Starbucks for about 20 years, which is a huge, it's thought of as an entrepreneurial company, and certainly it is, but intrapreneurship is actually the engine that makes the company grow and move. So I'm delighted, even though it's not a new concept, that it actually has a name that people can relate to, and I look forward to chatting more with you as we move on through the questions tonight.
Hi, I'm Francine Grant, and I work at Visa. I am happy to share my background on how I wound up in a payments company, but long story short, I have an engineering degree here from Penn State from like 100 years ago, and my role now is I lead our innovation practice for our what we call innovation activations at our sponsored events. So these are the sort of marquee events that we do. We're sponsors for the NFL, for FIFA, and for the Olympics. And so what we try to do there, what my role is to bring new ways to pay to these events and be able to share those, get feedback, try to bring the rest of the company along on, getting out of our day-to-day and getting on to the next big thing. So happy to chat with you guys.
Good evening. My name is Nikki Palmer. I work at Verizon, and I am an industrial engineering grad from 1990. It's good to be back at Penn State. And my role in Verizon, which had different predecessor companies, has really always been in the engineering the operations, the technology, the planning, the architecture, or something related to product and development. And for a long time, I ran the wireless network as the Chief Network Officer. I now have a new role where I get to assume that the network is just built and not actually build it. And I am now in charge of all technology and product development for Verizon. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, thank you. And if you're missing the obvious synergies here, you can buy your Verizon phone using your Visa card and then use it at Starbucks. So, this has been carefully knit together. So, it's kind of been interesting. I was at a panel like this last night and 3 different panelists, and I was not moderating. I was just in the audience, but listening to the journeys that everybody had to get to their kind of current position. And in this case, they were all entrepreneurs, and some of them had been PhD dropouts that had gone on to, create a juice company. And we had a magazine person who had been in fashion and medicine before she ended up doing a magazine and so on. And you're all Penn State graduates, which I am not. And you've had very different career paths. So I guess 2 questions really. One is, what do you remember well from your Penn State days and might have shaped your career path initially? And then secondly, how have your careers evolved? You mentioned engineering and things like that compared to what you're doing now, which is really dramatically different. So maybe just talk a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I think the thing that I remember most about Penn State is that you leave here with a brand. Starbucks is a big brand also, and I sort of define myself by the Penn State brand and the Starbucks brand, and it means something to people. So when you're traveling and you have your Penn State gear on, not only, like, I've had people scream at me in Narita Airport in Japan, we are, so you got to be on your toes. But what I'd say is, don't take your Penn State acumen and throw it away when you leave here, because it'll serve you well. And people from Penn State, if you're looking, to enter a company, are a great way to try to find like a small avenue to get information about the company and perhaps, get some sponsorship on a job. I think my parents would say that I had a misspent college education because I thought I was going to go to law school. And I just didn't have the money to do that right after college, and I wanted to work for a while. And once I found business, I knew that really was my journey. And I think the thing that I would say to you all is, what I learned the most was the harder you work as a young person while you still have energy versus trying to do it in your 50s and 60s, you're going to get ahead of your colleagues, and you're going to stay ahead of your colleagues. So I worry a little bit about this generation, because I know you want to live, not work, or not live. You work to live, not live to work. But I will tell you, if you have any aspirations for jobs like we have, the sooner that you really knuckle down and go after it, it will pay a dividend, and at some point, you don't have to work quite as hard. But I would say those are probably the 2 most important things I could say to you tonight. And taking some chances then. I was a 20-year IT person, had the opportunity at Starbucks to move into HR. I sort of thought about it over the weekend. There was a specific reason that they wanted me and a specific idea of what I thought I could bring, and I'm really glad I did, because it's totally changed the length of time that I probably could stay at Starbucks. 20-year careers are not that relevant anymore. I mean, people change jobs every few years, but I felt like I had a different job every 2 or 3 years, and it really kept it fresh, and it kept me learning. I think Penn State students are always Penn State students. They always want to learn, and that gave me the opportunity to keep on doing it. And then in terms of intrapreneurship, just, small improvements can make huge differences. And I think I got really good with the HRIT background of being able to find small ways to make serious financial improvements in the way we did some of our processes, et cetera. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that later.
Great. Thank you. Francine.
So my career was a little bit different than yours. I actually have an engineering degree, industrial engineering as well. And my first job out of Penn State was actually as a management consultant. So even though I was very well trained, and that degree still serves me to this day, I didn't follow a traditional engineering path. So I took a job in New York City, which is where I'm from, and I worked for Accenture, which was still Anderson Consulting back then. And I had an opportunity to kind of go on these different projects. I actually found myself in a lot of financial services projects, even though I think I was hired into their like manufacturing practice, but I was in New York and I was always on these financial services projects. And so I thought a lot about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to kind of go with my engineering degree. And I actually, instead of going back and getting a master's, which is what I really wanted to do, I wanted to go into biotech engineering, I decided instead to go back and get my MBA. And I did that. At that point, I moved to California, and life happens, right? So I moved to California, I had kids, I had a family, and I went back to the Haas School of Business at Berkeley and got my MBA while I was raising a family. And at the same time, I worked, or right before that, and then when I first started getting my MBA, I worked at Lucasfilm, which was an entertainment company, which is completely, again, unrelated. So I think I moved around a lot, and I really tried to find different things that I found interesting in. And then when I was in California, so I started working at startups. And then eventually I landed at Visa because during all these different career changes, I could always ask myself, like, what if we did this? And what if we did that? And even as a management consultant, I was one step ahead of the client. I mean, I was 22 years old, and I was like, I got to know this before they do. And I would be like, find something out maybe 5 minutes before I went into a meeting. And just, I was just one step ahead. And so I was always looking for, like, the next thing, what to do and how it, could serve me. And I think you get really well prepared at Penn State, but I also think, if I had to give any sort of piece of advice, it would be to just continue looking for the thing that really makes you happy, things that you get up and say, I get to do this instead of I have to do this, and then move when it's time, to move and really try new things and keep innovating, keep exploring, keep trying new things.
That's good advice. So I'm going to start by answering your first question, which was, what do you remember about your time here at Penn State and some pivotal moments? And I will tell you, being back on campus, I want to recount a bit of my freshman year for some of you out there. And maybe I'm talking specifically to the women, but probably not. And I will tell you that when I came here to get my engineering degree, it was not a lot of thought went into it. But I was good at math and science, and my dad was a Penn State engineer. So there you go. So I got here, and somewhere in my first semester, I called home. And I remembered this as I was driving past East Halls, because it was from there, that I called home in tears and said to my parents, I'm not cut out to be an engineer. I don't like this coursework. This chemistry is killing me. All of these reasons. I said, I just don't think I could do it. And I say that because what they were able to do that not everybody has in terms of a support system was to say, first, hear me out. Second, just support me by listening and encouraging and helping me find solutions, which included dropping chemistry and taking it over the summer. Always options. But long story short, I got over that hump and got my degree, and it was the best thing, really, that ever could have happened. And as I look at my career, I have often had those moments of doubt where I wonder to myself, can I do this? Or if I'm offered a promotion, or if I'm considering a job in a very unfamiliar territory, I will question, can I really do this? Why do people believe in me? Or, what do and maybe it's just me, but something tells me of all the people that I've led over the years and mentored and friendships I've had, it isn't just me. And I guess what I want to tell you most is that that's normal. It's natural if it happens to you. And it's very, very important in college as well as in your career and after college, and frankly, just in life, to have those people that'll have your back, the people that can count on you and you can count on them. Those relationships are absolutely critical. And they've served me well throughout my career at Verizon, which again, I never left. And to me, it was because I was passionate about, digging into technology problems and bringing like the pure technology to life for customers and businesses. Like I found that fun, working with really experts in the industry and the best team in the world to sort of say, here's how we can, turn this into something real. Here's how we're going to make this network work. Here's how it's going to be the best in the world. That I always found fun. And that's why I stayed. But along the way, I would say that's the minor part. It's what kept me there because it was intellectually challenging, but you will have bumps along the way. And when you do, it's important to, have the courage to kind of pick yourself up and keep on going.
Great advice. Thank you. I've been with EY for 38 years in 3 countries and a whole bunch of different jobs. So I would just echo, the comments of not stressing about where you're headed. Whatever your first stop is not going to be your last stop. So don't stress about it. Find something that you're passionate about and interested in, and then do your best at it. But if you join the right organization, you're going to have lots of opportunity within that organization, as I have had. But you're also going to have, increasingly in the model of, working for a lot of different organizations, as some of our other panelists have done, and certainly many of your peers are doing, as they join out there. So what I learned from this is that, and also that both Elizabeth and Francine remembered nothing about their experience at Penn State, which tells me they had a great experience at Penn State. So, all right, just kidding. So let's move on to the topic of the panel, and we use the terms entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, like everybody knows exactly what we mean by them, but I think it's probably worth spending a minute or two to define them, and maybe we'll start at the other end here with Nikki.
Sure. Honestly, I'll let someone else do the real definition. To me, it doesn't matter that much. To me, it's about a spirit. And I think we'll talk maybe a little more about innovating within, the confines as well as the vast resources of a large company, which is its own thing. But the spirit of entrepreneurship, when I think done well in large companies, aka intrapreneurship, is the thing that keeps them relevant. I mean, if you think about what large companies are good at, operational efficiency and scale, really trying to deliver, at least in Verizon's case, having a brand that represents quality and reliability and being the best. So everything that we do, every product we offer, we strive to improve, live up to and improve that brand. So how does that fit into, solving the next problem, or, thinking out of the box when you are, supporting over 100 million customers on your network? It can be tough. So to me, it's not any one organization or one person that owns innovation. In fact, it's got to be culture, especially in a large company. You have to be I've found over the years, I believe you have to be very vocal about it and intentional to give people the space to be innovative, because it's far too easy just to squash it. In fact, if you're not deliberate about it, that is exactly what will happen. So, allowing people to have those ideas, but not just the idea, but give them the space and time outside of their normal responsibilities to actually do something about it with some resource. That requires some programmatic thinking, that requires, a lot. But I think the kiss of death, frankly, is to say we do innovation over here. Because unless you have the whole organization trying to think about what are the pain points for your customers, large and small, how do you use crowdsource data to see what's really out there in addition to your employee body? How do you figure out these questions? A large company will very easily become irrelevant if they're not always thinking about those things. And I can go on, but I'll leave some time for others. But there's a lot of ways to do that, both inside the company as well as with launch boxes like I know we have here at Penn State. I visited one today, very impressive. We have our own sort of version of innovation centers and labs, but you've got to be connected with small companies, with unique thinkers, influencers, as well as your own employees and customers in a different kind of way. There's just no other way to do it today.
So you see a combination of both intrapreneurship, helping this culture inside for people to innovate, but also having an openness to accept external innovation.
Yes, it's M&A. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm going to Israel in a few weeks because they have outstanding tech innovation. So I'll take a small contingent and we'll go over and we'll meet with a bunch of smaller companies that are very focused on solving some problems that we are also interested in solving, that maybe we won't solve ourselves, but we can see the technology. So that's just one way. So going out, finding where innovation is happening and being a part of those communities, as well as inviting those communities in, whether it's in a lab or an incubator or accelerator of sorts. And then, of course, you've got to have just, I believe, your employee body who believes it's their job to do things differently and to innovate. You know, sometimes we think innovation is just, you know, oh, that next great idea that then becomes a multi-million-dollar product. Innovation is taking a process, as our industrial engineers know, taking a process and, you know, making that process different. And changing it can provide agility and efficiency, and that is innovative. So that's part of what I think.
Great. Francine, what about Visa?
So I think Visa is a classic example of a company that probably was super innovative when they super innovative when they actually came out with a credit card, you know, whatever that was 60 years ago, right? That didn't exist, so that was super innovative. And then became not innovative at all as a result, because, you know, everything just moved along beautifully, and our competition was to get, and still is to a certain extent, to get cash and check to go away. And, you know, we weren't competing with MasterCard or anybody else like that. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we, you know, started seeing there were, you know, the PayPals of the world and the Venmos of the world, and there was finally some management that really recognized that, you know, we needed to think about innovation in a different way. So I wouldn't call us entrepreneurial at all, but we did the classic, let's start the innovation center, let's, you know, bring some people in. But we were bringing our own clients in, really, and we would collaborate together, but we weren't really seeing a lot of things outside of our, you know, sort of circle of friends. And since then, fast forward, and I can tell you about what I did as part of that, but fast forward to about now, we don't have an innovation team anymore. We have a product team, and our product team, you know, our products used to be things like credit processing or debit processing, but now they've sort of embraced things like mobile payments or the Internet of Things or other things like that. And we've lost this innovation center, but I have to tell you, the innovation center was sort of the catalyst, because people weren't doing anything, and then all of a sudden you were the cool kids on the innovation team, or else you were like left out, and that wasn't good either. But then when they started, you know, kind of incorporating some of the things that we learned as being part of an innovation team, it really focused on that sort of entrepreneurial sense. So we still have a long way to go, but we now have, for any of you that are interested, we have these Visa Everywhere Initiative competitions, which is really finding startups and, you know, giving them a challenge and having these competitions where they win money, but they also win time, you know, with our engineers and on our platform. And then we also have a new venture practice, and we have a fintech practice. Yeah. So rather than trying to just, maybe fintechs are competitors of ours, maybe not, but we do know that all the ideas are not going to come from us. And so rather than trying to, oh, this platform is doing money this way, or how is that going to affect us, or is it going to take away from us, we're partnering with them. And that was a hugely new deal. But even to do that, you have to have the right infrastructure. And Visa was a network. Then those lines were laid. I'm sure you have the same thing with Verizon, right? And oh my God, you got to put it on the cloud. You got to start letting people tap into the network. This is a crisis. So, you know, it's you know, it takes time. But I think that it's important to have people in the company who can, you know, push that along.
You guys had great points, and I'm going to try to just do a little different so we're not saying the same thing. I think it's really interesting that the same week the very last Blockbuster video store closed, Starbucks opened its 30,000th store. So we have 30,000 Starbucks stores. We had 1,000 when I started in 1997. And what I would say to you is there's a difference between the way a company culture thinks about entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, that when you're interviewing for jobs, if intrapreneurship is important to you, that you consider when you're asking your questions. Because obviously Blockbuster could have been Netflix or, one of the other streaming options, and they chose not to because they were, hung up in the way they always did things. So I think what I would say is Starbucks owns, people own products, and that's where the innovation happens. We're probably very fortunate, and most of our innovation that you see is our products in the store. But to be able to deliver those products, there has to be a lot of innovation back in the office and in the supply chain. But I think we're really fortunate in that we're dealing with millions of customers all of the time who are providing a lot of ideas that we might not think of ourselves. So if you ever drink a Frappuccino, just know that we had a very aggressive store manager in Southern Cal that needed a cold beverage to compete with their Ganitas and other cold beverages that were being sold, and we didn't have a cold beverage. And that platform is over $1 billion each year. When I first joined Starbucks, their whole revenue stream is only $880 million. So that product, 20 years later, is more than the company was 20 years ago. And so, there's also, in the original Starbucks, you couldn't put milk and sugar in your coffee. If you wanted that, you had to take it somewhere else and get it. But we listened to the customers and we adjusted. So if you think about like going in and getting coffee and you have no condiments, that's what the original Starbucks was. And where we've come is really trying to understand constantly what our customers want. And that is the greatest way to innovate, I think, in an organization. If you have, like we do, customer-facing stuff.
So great example with the Frappuccino. I hadn't heard that story before, but that's a great story. And I think all of you illustrated the fact that, innovation isn't a once and done, say, okay, well, we've innovated, so we're going to be okay for a few years now. It's sort of a constant process that these large companies have to go through. And I think, you all illustrated, for you as students that are trying to figure out what do you want to do? Do you want to go and be an entrepreneur and start something of your own or work in a startup? Or do you want to go into an organization that really values innovation process and results internally and be a change agent through being an intrapreneur in a larger corporation? And, there's no right or wrong answer. It's what's best for you. But the good news is there's great opportunities to do both. I want to spend a few minutes diving into the whole culture aspect because I think that's really important. I mean, it's kind of a given that big companies need to innovate, so let's just accept that. But how do you do that in a culture? And I was in an MBA class earlier this afternoon. Someone asked a great question about, how do you do that? Do you get time set aside to just go and innovate? Is it something that is in your reward system because what gets measured and rewarded gets done and that kind of thing? So let's talk a little bit about culture, and maybe we can go back to you, Elizabeth. What was it about Starbucks that allowed this innovation to take place? And the side of that is, what is it in some companies that really impedes innovation from taking place?
Yeah, so because the company was founded by an entrepreneur, that spirit of entrepreneurship is always there. Part of the early founding of the company when it went public was to make sure that every single employee has some stock in the company. And so Starbucks calls their employees partners because they have stock in the organization. And there's a feeling of all of us that what we do is going to impact the stock price and therefore impact all of our overall wealth. But it is a mindset. And if as easy as it is to follow the culture, there are people that try to stymie that culture. And as leaders, those leaders don't last very long. I don't know that we have exact awards or rewards, but there is an expectation that we are continuously innovating, and there's lots of opportunities to talk about it. And certainly there are spot bonuses and financial incentives when things really, when we make a big impact. But I think it's a feeling of satisfaction more than it's anything in an entrepreneurial mindset company that you and your organization are going to continue to come up with new ways to make better products or better processes or just a much more effective way of doing your work so that you have a positive impact. And I would just say again, certain cultures, like you can tell when you talk to people, like talk about change, like you want to do something different, how would you go about that? If you have an idea, how do you take that forward? Like if you ask some of those questions in your interview process, I think you're going to find out pretty quickly whether it's a forward-thinking company, which means it's going to be here for a while, or whether it's not very forward-thinking, and that might not exactly be where you want to spend the next couple of years.
So as an HR professional, did you build that into your hiring policy and approach, or did that come after someone is hired that you kind of got the approach of, always think innovation?
So, the thing about innovative companies is I don't know that we ever actually know what we do. Like, it's just sort of, it's like a magic, right? It's like pixie dust. It sort of happens. But I do think we ask questions in the interview process to try to make sure people are open. Even if they're not the initiators of change, they have to be open to the acceptance of change. So I do think there's a lot of, and I think we talk a lot to our hiring managers about making sure that they're asking questions like that. But we also need to hire, at some point, the next 5 Howard Schultzes. So it's also about, like, do people have the intellectual chops and the thought processes that would actually take us to the next level.
Curiosity, right?
Curiosity, yes, yeah. So I hope that answers.
So Francine, in these, maybe we can get you to talk a little bit about what are some of the impediments. Not everybody loves to innovate, so what are the impediments there? Is there, how do you overcome the not invented here kind of mentality on these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to give a little plug for Visa that they've become a very innovative company in my experience over the last few years. But it is so much easier to say no than to actually allow something to happen, especially when you're in a risk-adverse company where the risk is meaningful, right? If the Visa network goes down, like commerce as we know it stops, right? So there's good reasons for it, but sometimes there are things that you don't have to have the 99.999 effectiveness for if you're doing a prototype, if it's something in the world that I live in where I want to do something new and I only need it up for 3 days, and yet I have to go through the same legal reviews and privacy reviews and risk reviews and operational reviews and cybersecurity reviews, and the list goes on and on and on about all the reasons why I shouldn't do it. And it can be defeating, right? You can just say, okay, I'm just not going to do this because it's just too hard. But in the long run that it's the right thing to do, that if you can get these things out there and if they're small, you can get great learnings from it, you can prove your concept. So you have to bring everybody else on board. And especially if they're not in the product organization or what was the innovation organization, you might be a person who looks at it from a financial perspective and says, oh, I don't think that's a good investment. I'm not going to do the connected car. And no, like I know that doesn't hit your numbers, but yeah, we need to do the connected car. Somebody else is going to do that. You might say that, yeah, the car's going to pay, on your behalf, right? You don't have to take out your card as cards are going away. So there's a lot of that, and I think you just have to be persistent. You have to know your strengths, right? So I'm an engineer. I'm really good at explaining products to people, but I'm not a designer. I'm not a developer. So I need to loop the designers and the developers in to really, give this credibility to make sure that people are, on board with it. And then I need to recognize the people. You can almost call it charm. You have to recognize the people who are putting up the biggest barriers and be able to get them to see the value of it and, really feel appreciated and thanking them and giving them credit and really, bringing them into this solution as opposed to being the barrier to the solution. So there's lots of ways you can get around it, but it's a challenge. And sometimes you can't win. Like if there's a regulation in place that the French government will not let you do blah, 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 you have to sign something on paper and you're not going to have paper, you can't do it. And you have to know when. You have to know your own culture and when you can't do something.
Which battles to fight.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, sometimes you have the greatest idea, but it's not the right timing.
Yeah, timing.
And I think for us, it's having the resiliency to bring the idea back when circumstances change or legislation changes or people change. And I don't know if we talk about that enough, that just because you get a no today doesn't mean you're going to get a no tomorrow.
Yeah, I got an interesting story about timing. It's actually from one of our big partners, Corning. We buy an awful lot of fiber from them. And the glass that's on most of your smartphones, a lot of it's from Corning. The recipe for that glass was developed and not even patented because it was thought to be such a valuable secret recipe. It was sort of put in a vault like 20 years ago, only to come out much, much later when the time was right. So some of these inventions really are a matter of timing and certainly a matter of luck. And I would only add to the discussion that, coming into a company like Verizon with a heritage of being a regulated business, I heard a little bit of that from you, and that is not very innovative usually. And I will say in the past, I don't know that was our culture to be very innovative. I remember my first year or two working for Bell Atlantic out of university here, and I was like, what is this? Like, they want to change the culture. Like, why do they need to change? How come they don't just act like this? And you may see some of that when you go into big companies. Thankfully, a lot of that has changed where I work, or I don't think I would have lasted there for sure, because it was demanded that we change. And, now innovation has just got to be a part of what we do. We don't put it in performance agreements, not that I've seen. But the last point I want to make on this is that I think innovation, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, is really it's a leadership issue. Because there's not many students that come into their first job and don't have new ideas or don't have some thoughts on what can be improved. I remember in the past we would hire a computer science, industrial electrical engineer, and they'd come in and they say, well, there's a better way to do this, and they would just script it. And we'd be like, oh no, IT does that. You can't. Well, why in the world would we tell someone that they can't fix a problem with skills that's exactly why we hired them? So, again, that hopefully is in our past, but I think leaders have got to be the ones that set the parameters and the safe zones and the encouragement and the highlighting of failures. I mean, these are not easy things to do as a leader, but some leaders will do it, and they get results when, it creates a culture where there is a freedom, and people, aren't concerned every day that they're going to lose their job or that, they're going to be beat down for something, for failing. I mean, it really is the leaders that need to set that tone. So, you made the point about when you interview with companies, large or small, you should be able to get a feel for that from the people that you're interviewing with, I would think.
So I want to pick up on two great points that you made. First of all, the only people that like change are wet babies. So, having leadership coming in and kind of driving that culture where change is good is really important, because let's face it, not many of us like to change if we don't have to. In some ways, when I moved to the Caribbean to work down there for 7 years, somebody said, if you ever want to understand working in the West Indies, you've got to read Herman Wouk's book, The Carnival. And in The Carnival, there's a great line that says you have to understand that it's not that the average West Indian is opposed to change, they just don't see much need for it. And that sort of guided me for the next 7 years of working down there, and it was, largely true. But the question I have for you is, when is it okay to fail at Verizon?
That's a great question. I would say from experience that we're tolerant of failures. We prefer that they be small, that they happen fast, that they don't carry a lot of capital investment along with them. Listen, we're a company, we invest almost $18 billion a year creating the best network. So it's not a matter of investment or heft or scale. But with that money, you can make some pretty big mistakes. So in running the network, if we made some bad calls and, invested billions in something that didn't turn out to be so great, that might not, it might be career limiting. It just might be. Luckily, you have in corporations like this, it's usually not one person that's going to be making multi-billion-dollar decisions. There are some systems of checks and balances. So when you go down, you all go down. But there is big decisions, and then there's smaller ones. I would say, most recently, without, again, we're trying to think of this as a highlight and not think of it as a bad thing. We just had a new tech innovation, which we're very excited about, and we brought it in front of a number of business leaders, and they just didn't see it. So you know what? I reward the people that came up with this, that worked hard on it, and we're going to take that, and maybe the time's not right, and we're going to move on. So, I think some people could say that's a failure, and we were tolerant of that failure. I don't even look at it as a failure. I think it's just one in a series of tech innovations that we need to keep bringing up, and a few will hit, and many will not, and that's okay. So I think there's some tolerance there.
Do you have a difference in the way you treat something that's kind of at the core of the business, keep the network running 24/7 versus at the edge with
for sure.
new products?
Listen, our brand is built on the quality and reliability of our network.
Yeah.
And, so we're not going to play around too much with things that would affect that. Now, that doesn't mean that we aren't always looking for the next tech innovation that's going to make that network even better, and that's going to make it run even more efficiently. And we do that. We do it all the time. Mm-hmm. But we test the heck out of it, and we make sure that it is reliable and can perform at scale before we introduce it, across a broad range. The way that networks are moving now, where they're virtualized, they're in the cloud's pushing to the edge. We have 5G technology in the RAN, and by the way, we launched today. Big news, first in the world. 5G mobility with consumer smartphones. So really excited about that. But that, in a way, that's innovation. Yes, it's the next generation of technology, but you don't get that kind of innovation if you just sit back and wait for the standards bodies to come up with a 5G standard and then make sure that the chipset providers, the infrastructure providers, the smartphone manufacturers all start to develop. No, you got to work that. Yep. And to me, that is innovation. And that's part of, why we develop these technology forums, to get everybody on the same page so that we could advance the technology benefits to consumers. So there's lots of, forums of innovation.
Well, congratulations
Yes,
on the
no, it's a big
5G
day,
launch,
sorry.
and
It's a big day.
that's a big day.
Congrats.
Excited, yes, thank you.
Now we'll have even more IoT devices that can run and provide us with information we have
Massive
to respond to.
scalability,
Yeah.
super low latency, and throughput beyond your wildest dreams. So there it is in three things.
There you go. See the rest on the news. Francine, what is it about startups that makes them so attractive and so able to, innovate quickly when big companies have lots of people, lots of money, lots of equipment, but they don't always do it as fast as startups?
There's so many answers to that. I'll give you some of the quick answers. So from a startup perspective, they really have nothing to lose, right? They have to move nimbly. They have a limited amount of money. They have a limited amount of people. They're invested in the success of the company, and they have to be nimble. And usually they're bigger risk takers, right? So they will take on more risk, and then again, you'll fail quickly. When you work at a big company, the numbers are bigger for sure, but also the culture is different. So, for me to take a risk on the network, on the Visa network, is unacceptable. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. We're never going to risk that network. It's just not going to happen. And I don't care how many times if you tell them that, hey, I'll give you a great example. So if you think about Venmo, I could have turned blue in the face saying that, we should be able to pay people. People should be able to pay people. I go in the blue in the face right now saying someone on Venmo should be able to pay someone on Square Cash without having to download this different app. It's never going to happen, right? Because the risk of introducing, some sort of connection to the network, it's just not going to be there. But the risk of that is, of course, everyone's going to move to Venmo, and then, you're not going to have Visa transactions. So the company knows it, but yet they're a little bit too risk averse to actually change it. And I think when you're in a startup, you're going to have to win or lose, right? You don't have a chance to like, well, it'll be fine. I got another 10 years of transaction processing before I really worry about anything. So it changes for it.
So it's not only the legacy systems that need to be protected in a big company or the core business.
Well, that too, of course.
That has to be protected, but also it's just a fear of, is this the right time to change? Is this really going to be the future or
And
not?
those are the toughest calls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we face very similar things. I think many businesses do. It's not, you can go through history and see how many businesses have failed because new technology or some shift in the landscape has caused a total eclipse of what they did. In most cases, they weren't blind to it. They knew it was there, but it's a matter of when do you make that shift? When do you risk cannibalizing your base? It's a very, those are big, gut check moments.
Right.
And, good leaders will look them in the face and, try to make the right decision, which isn't always, I just got to protect the base. I got to protect the base. I got to protect the quarterly earnings and my bonus because I'm going to retire in 3 years. I mean, that is some
But in
of
practice,
some
that
of it.
happens. Yeah.
The innovator's dilemma.
Yeah, right.
Yep. So I have one more question, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience. And I do have a few secret questions that I'll ask if we have a pause, but I really would like to get engagement with the audience going here. So I'll pose this last one to Elizabeth, and that is really if you had to do it all over again as a student. God forbid that we do. But if you had to do it all over again, what would you give to these students? What would you do? Would you go into a big company? Would you go into a startup or found your own company? Does it really matter?
I don't think it matters. I think and we've talked about this, I think it's like what floats your boat. Like what really makes you want to get up in the morning and go do whatever. I was not, I grew up in Bellefonte. I mean, coming to Penn State was a risk, right? So there was no way I was prepared emotionally, monetarily, or any other way to try my own thing. But I picked companies that got me really comfortable that I could be an innovator in my space. And that worked really well for me. So I think it's really following your own passion. And I feel like I want to just tag onto this. The problem with big companies versus startups is we all have some level of regulation. Most startups don't pay any attention to that, which is really unfair. It's unfair because they work much more, I think, freely, but it's also the engine that keeps America running. So it's unfair to the big companies, but it's what makes America great. So even though I don't like it, I do like it. But in terms of you all, I think you'll know the kind of thing you want to do. I think Penn State does prepare you for that. And I knew for myself, I needed to go into a big company and learn big company skills, and that has served me really well in my career.
Excellent. So questions in the audience of me or of our panelists, and I'm just going to try and restate the question for the benefit of our viewing audience at home. So just put your hand up and shout it out. Yes, over here.
Yes, so I have a question regarding Verizon.
Is this about your bill?
I work for T-Mobile, so. My question is it true that Verizon's trying to shift to also providing content? And if so, how is that going to challenge certain, like, the current cable and ISP sort of, like, system things that we have in place right now?
So the question is, will a mobile provider like Verizon move into the content world, and how will that compete with the cable companies and other content providers?
So thank you for the question, T-Mobile. So listen, our strategy is pretty clear, and it's based on network superiority. You don't get the best 5G network without having the best 4G network, which is why we've been fortifying it and building it, et cetera, and now being first in the world to launch 5G. All that being said, there has long been a discussion about how much do a traditional carrier need content and what rides over those networks. We've had some content plays. We have a Verizon Media Group, which does have some content assets. But as opposed to some of our competitors who have made very large bets and large acquisitions in the content space, long form, short form, et cetera, we are not making those acquisitions. So what you see us doing is leveraging our network and moving with 5G to provide a broadband service with over-the-top type of content partnerships, like Apple TV, right? And that's how we plan to compete, yes, with cable. And frankly, there's a lot of underserved, either not served or underserved places in the United States. And we are, someone's saying right here, Penn State, in Pennsylvania, certainly. And it is our plan to use the power of the network to provide that, with different types of content partnerships. That's our strategy right now.
Great. Thank you for the question. Yes, sir, up at the back.
Hi, so I have a great respect for the company you work for, and I appreciate the big companies and the innovations they brought, the technology they brought for the people. But my question is, for startups, do you think when they make some product that's innovation on the existing product by the big companies, do you think they face more threats from people trying to copy that, or either from big companies seeing that as a threat? Because I just recently heard, I read a story about how voicemail was first invented in the 1970s, but AT&T killed the product and delayed the invention for about 20 years.
So the question.
15 years, I think.
Okay, so the question was, do large companies view innovation by early stage companies as a threat, or I guess an opportunity for embedding that?
I'll take a stab. And listen, it's a complicated marketplace. I would not say that we view startups as threats. In fact, if we did, we wouldn't try to be in so much, contact with them. Frankly, some startups are best for a company like Verizon's interest if purchased by one of our infrastructure providers. So, an outcome may be that a new technology or an innovation gets purchased, and then it then becomes part of a standards-based ecosystem or an improvement that comes along. I mean, listen, I think there are stories like the ones you mentioned. I believe that in a company like ours, we are not there. We are looking for what customers want, what can make our networks and products and services better, what can solve their pain points, whether a consumer or a business. And we know we can't do it alone. We're going to do it with our partners. We're going to do it with small companies. We're going to do it in a very different way than just one big monolith that doesn't work anymore.
So I might just go to Francine on your question as well, because you mentioned Venmo, which I believe is owned by PayPal, and you have your own version of that inside of Visa with, or not?
We have Square Cash, which
You
is
have
actually
Square
owned by
Cash.
Square, but we're an
Okay.
investor in Square. So
Okay.
I'm going to echo though what you said. So I think at one point maybe people saw the pie and it was a fixed pie, and you had to take that share of the pie, or somebody else would have that share of the pie. But certainly in the time that I've been at Visa, and I've worked there for 8 years now, there was a recognition first when we launched our innovation center, and now that we've closed our innovation, well, we still have our centers, but we've closed our innovation team. We've moved away from everything has to be Visa to this whole idea about partnerships. Yeah. It started about around 2014 when we first launched the centers. It's one of the things we did was we partnered with Apple actually for Apple Pay back when they thought they could do it themselves, and maybe they can now, but at the time, they were like, hey, we want to do payments, and we were like, okay, sure, take 3 years and we'll get you. And they're like, there's the internet. And we said, okay, well, we'll change it. But we realized that we didn't have to have Apple Pay versus Visa. It could be a partnership. And so now, fast forward 5 years later, we have a strategic partnership team. We have a fintech team. We have a venture team. And we also have the Visa Everywhere initiative, which is really a competition to use Visa's APIs to develop, payment solutions that are in partnership with what we're doing. So I think that maybe was the case, and I'm sure it still is the case in many cases, but in our case, it hasn't been my experience at all.
And Seattle's sort of the hotbed of startups, right? So what I would say is there's a lot of serial entrepreneurs that take a little niche that one of us big companies need, that don't have the ability to develop, and they'll develop and sell. And then they'll start again with another great idea. So it kind of depends, I think, what you want to do.
Well, and I can add, there's venture capitalists out there, which large companies can talk to and say, hey, I need a better solution for this. It's not really our place to develop that solution, but if you find companies out there that are doing that, or if you would, you're investing in companies, bring them to us. We'd like to see it, or vice versa. So it is sort of a different ecosystem now, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that, innovation is about a partnership of, of various types, that you can bring that into the company. And there's a lot of ways that the big co has to communicate their needs, whether it's going and talking to venture capital investor, or showing up at a conference and presenting the needs, or someone like P&G that has a whole website called P&G Connect Develop that they post, I need this new kind of soap, and any researcher can kind of submit their formula for the new soap and get paid. So there's a lot of different techniques that people are using to find innovation and bring it into big corporations. And likewise, I think a lot of VC firms that I interact with are also recognizing one of the most valuable things they can do for their portfolio companies is not only provide capital, but also provide introductions and say, hey, I can take you to Visa, I can take you to Starbucks, I can take you to Visa, and introduce you to the right people, and I know what they're looking for. And actually, as an investor, that's really good for me, because if they don't like what you've got, I'm probably not going to provide your next round of funding. So it really is synergistic. Another question in the audience. Yes, ma'am.
So in big companies like the ones that you're in, when people have new ideas, what would they have to do to convince you that their ideas are valuable and worth?
So the question was, in a large company, if you have members of your team that have a good idea, how do they convince you to have time to work on that idea, to pay attention to the idea?
I got sort of a simple answer to that. It's pretty easy. It has to be aligned with our strategy. It has to be sort of in the business that we're in. And if it's that, so if someone has a new idea that says, you know what, I think I can use our existing networks, or our 5G network and all that bandwidth, and I could develop an app that will solve this problem for our consumer customers, or our businesses need compute at the edge in order to have automated manufacturing, or a augmented reality training solution. I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic. So if they come and say, hey, I've got a new formula for coffee, I'm like, yeah, no, I think it's actually pretty easy. I want to believe, I do believe it's pretty easy. Now the challenge can be if you have an idea, but it's not like you don't do that. So say you're in finance and you have an idea about a new product. So you won't necessarily be developing that product, but it's your idea. So now it's about making the connections, and and building up. What we're doing now is teams. You have an idea, get the right people together and do some rapid prototyping. There's so much more capability to do that nowadays, and I don't know any manager really that would not allow their employee to take part in that.
Great comments, and I think it also, all the good ideas don't reside in Seattle or San Francisco or New York, I guess. So how do you then sort of access your workforce around the world or around the country, depending on the business, because those ideas could come from anywhere, and you need to have the culture and the processes to be able to bubble those up. So great question. Yes, up in the back there, sir. Yes. We'll start with you, and yep.
Hello. I really appreciate the panel and everything discussing your past experiences. Outside of scalability
So that's an interesting question. So do you mean, so the question was, how do you define a billion-dollar company in terms of
$1 billion.
value proposition? How do you build to a billion? Is that the question?
I mean, not really. Like, of course, like people typically like they evaluate based on forecasts and other things.
Okay.
Like maybe seeing the big corporations that you guys are. What would you say were like the core things that allowed you to get to the level where the corporations are today?
Okay, so what is it that is valued as you build your company and scale? How do you get to be a unicorn, and how do you get to be beyond a unicorn?
So, Nikki said it, I'm going to just reiterate. It's about a strategic plan. When I joined Starbucks, our strategic plan was to get to 2,000 stores. Every year, based on success of moving towards the accomplishment of that strategy, we would set the next 3 to 5 year strategic plan. So I think if you want to you start a company with a small core of people and you want to take it to the next step, you have to build a strategy that's going to help you move your direction for your however many people are in your company towards that answer. But none of this stuff happens like in one small step. There's hundreds and thousands probably of decisions that get you from $100,000 company to a $500,000 company and so on. And I hate to keep coming back to culture, but it is a lot about what is the culture of your company. Is it growth?
Yeah.
Is it value? Is it a product? Is it many products? Like, that's the strategy.
I just want to underscore passion for a second because, I remember a product manager that I worked with many years ago back when there weren't a lot of data products on smartphones. There was BlackBerries and, the internet access in a 2G world was, it was text messaging basically. And this guy just had such passion around the next, like he saw the future. And he wasn't alone, but he was the most vocal. And what he was able to do was sell. And entrepreneurs have to do that for sure all the time, but you have to do it in big companies too. You need to have a supportive culture, but you still need to have the passion. You still need to be able to convince people that your idea is good, because at some point, as much as we could do some of the rapid prototyping and small scale incubation, at some point you're going to talk about commercialization, you're going to talk about capital investment, and it's going to get real. And when it gets real, that's when the other people start coming out of the woodwork, right? And that's when you really have to believe and push and advocate. Of course, have your facts straight, right? I mean, you need to, be honest about what you believe, but then not be afraid. I do see people get, if they're a weak need about that, it's too easy to get overrun. If you think something is good, as a product manager or anyone, you've got to push. And if that's not your personality, that maybe isn't the right job.
Yeah, Nikki, I think that's a great point. I mean, and as students here at the school, understanding that you're always selling. You're selling yourself. You're selling your ideas. You might be selling a product at some point, but you're always selling. And so, as you hone skills, that's a really important one to hone. I just want to go back to you, Elizabeth, for a minute, because even though you're retired from Starbucks, you still say we a lot. Yep. So of those 30,000 units that you have, how many of those are outside of the U.S. today?
Probably,
give or take.
Yeah, I would say probably 20,000 of them
Are
outside
so
of the U.S.
two-thirds outside of the U.S.
Yeah.
So this is another key, aspect of innovation is how do you take a concept like Starbucks and take it internationally, into different cultures. And I'm good friends with Michael Wu, who took the franchise in Asia. And so I understand sort of, how successful that's been for him. But it's not easy to transport some of these concepts and take them internationally.
Yeah, and I think we probably started with, you had to have like the exact same situation in Asia that you had in the United States, and we learned from that. And we have food products specifically, and some drinks, that are much more oriented towards that population. And in the early days, we weren't very flexible about that. The we is a tell. Since you mentioned that, the we is a tell about the culture. When somebody's talking about their company, if they're saying we, or they're saying, the T-Mobile organization or the Verizon organization, that's a big tell. People who are saying we, like they feel they are integral into the organization. So I think like how you listen in the interview, I think is just a good way of knowing whether it is a collaborative. We haven't used that word collaborative. I think we've talked about it, but we haven't said it. Collaborative organization where everybody's trying to move the needle in the same way from different viewpoints or not. So I'm glad you.
It's a great point. Yes, sir, in the white shirt there.
I'm Ryan. I'm a corporate innovation and entrepreneurship student here. Thanks for coming. So my question is, you guys are all part of organizations that employ hundreds, if not thousands of people. So in managerial positions like you, have you found that the sheer size of your organization impedes on you making innovations within your company because it might take too long to make the innovation across the entire company, or it might damage short-term sales or something like that?
So the question is, in big organizations, multiple thousand people, and in all of us, I guess, how has that, culture, the sand in the gears, does that slow us down from an innovation standpoint, or how do we manage that? You want to?
Yeah, I would just say it can if you let it. And just back to leadership. It is very easy for those things to happen, especially when you said hundreds of thousands. How about hundreds of thousands? I mean, that's kind of the amount of employees that we're talking about here sometimes. And some of them are, field engineers. Some of them are retail store managers. I mean, they're, all across the gamut, international as well. So doing something one way and doing it quickly is an obvious challenge. And to that end, as much as I have a personal bias towards a, less formal, more agile way of working, there is a place for certain types of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is not the bad word, bureaucracy, but as the way that provides known structures and ways to affect change. So, whether it's a Lean Six Sigma program, whether it's a program, that transforms how you work, there has to be, I believe, in large corporations, an understanding of who does what and how stuff gets done, or else you get mired in this, I don't know, it's their issue, their problem, their responsibility, oh, that's my responsibility. So there needs to be, some of that. But again, to me, it really is based in the culture. And if you have a culture of trust, a culture of, I am going to assume no ill intent, I am going to assume we're all on the same page and the strategy is clear and we're rowing in the same direction. I mean, at Verizon, we have a credo. And some may think it's a little corny, but I tell you, most people in the hundreds of thousands of people that work for us think it's a great thing because it has stood the test of time. And without reciting the whole thing for you, there is, line by line, very intentional of how we work. We have business because of our customers. Don't ever forget that, right? We're only here for them. Our best was good for today. Tomorrow we'll do better. That's my favorite line in the credo because to me that's innovation. That says I'm always giving my all, but I'm always going to do better. So those things have to be present or else it will be very easy, I think, to get mired down in some of those traps.
Okay, let's go to Saxby's shirt here, and then the gentleman beside you.
So we brought up a lot of scenarios where companies are being forced to almost change or reinvent themselves because the industries they're in. Like IBM had to do that with the computers, and I think we're facing that right now with the oil and gas industry with the electric car movement. And I think I just want to talk, or I want to ask about the HR side of things, because if you look at Blockbuster, I mean, they have a company full of people who are really knowledgeable in like logistics and retail. If they want to shift to like a business model like Netflix, they have to get an entirely new team
So the question, just to quickly restate it, is if you are in a legacy business and you need to move to a newer business, how do you deal with the legacy people that you have there who may not have the skills to go into the new business? So I'll go to our resident HR specialist here.
Thanks, pal. I'll give you $1 later. I think, I hate to keep going back to the strategy, but I'm going to go to the strategy because I think companies have to be honest about what the evolution path is to be able to stay in business. And none of these things we've talked about happened in a minute. They've happened over a period of years. And I don't know, I'm certainly not a supply chain expert, but I think, we have gone from mostly coffee and tea to all sorts of products in our stores. It just takes time and planning, and maybe it's because part of our Starbucks credo is treat people with respect and dignity. Like, I believe people can evolve if you lay out the plan, if we lay out the training, if we lay out a communication path. I interviewed for a job one time, and the CIO was moving from the old mainframe stuff to client server. And I said, what's the change plan? And he said, I told him they got to change. I'm like, but what? Like, what's the training, the path? So that's why companies go from bright to dark, and it's just not thinking through how do I communicate the change that we need to make, and how do I do it in steps so that it's not scary and frightening. And then I suppose if there's some technology that wipes you out, that's going to happen periodically.
This happens to us all the time. I mean, maybe not in as big a step as you were asking, but in technology leaps. So when we went from 3G to 4G networks, you may not think that's a big deal. You may think, hey, if you know RF or if you know engineering, you're going to do that. But we have our vast workforce of cell techs and engineers that manage switches and gear that work on 3G gear. Working on 4G gear is different. It requires a new set of skills. And we've led through analog to digital changes, and then to virtualizing networks. All of those things require completely different skills in the technical workforce. And so I couldn't agree with you more. In my experience, the best way to do that is to be crystal clear about where you're going with plenty of time and say, this is the future. And then provide roadmaps of training. If you want to be part of this future, here is how you get there. We're happy to help. And in the end, it's okay if you say, I don't want to. We part as friends. Our CEO used to use that line occasionally, and I think it's marvelous because it is an adult relationship, where you're saying, you know what, we're going to go here, and it doesn't mean anything you did for us wasn't fantastic in the past, but this company's changing. You can change with us if you don't want to, or sometimes you're just not up for it. Sometimes you just say, you know what, maybe 10 years ago, but not now. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna raise my hand, and that's okay.
Francine, do you see that at Visa as well, with horses for courses and changing people?
So I don't want to speak on behalf of Visa, but I would caution anyone that if you think that a big company isn't going to lay you off in like a minute because they've changed direction, you would be foolish. So I think that you have to you're lucky if you work in a company where they're willing to invest that in you, but as much as people, want to invest in their people and train them, that big companies are big companies. And if they need a whole department that isn't relevant anymore, or if they need a new skill set, they will get that, right? And so you have to, I think, be in charge of your own career. And I think you have to be in charge of your own skill set and how you sort of navigate that and recognize that there's not really any job security, and it kind of goes back to the big company versus the entrepreneur. Like, some people just want to work for themselves because they can control their destiny, and other people think that they're dedicating all this time to this company, and then next week they just decide to eliminate an entire department. And I'm not using Visa as a reference for that, but I'm using the
duly noted. We'll make
and-
sure your GCO doesn't get a copy of this recording.
But I've worked at a lot of companies, right, big and
absolutely.
small, and
Yeah.
I don't think that's news to anyone. And there was a time where, you took a job with IBM when you graduated with your Penn State engineering degree, and you worked there until you retired, and
Yeah.
they gave you a watch or whatever, and you got, it was fabulous. It's not like that anymore. And I think particularly for people who are over, say, I don't know, a certain age, they're not necessarily prepared to go into this new sort of world. And then what do? So they have their encore career, it's great, right? Or they retire, or they find themselves with a bunch of skills that aren't relevant anymore. And I think it's really important to be aware of that and to be able to make sure that you can control your own destiny by doing your own thing.
So this would be a
within or
fun
without.
poll. How many people in the room think they will work for one organization their entire career? Okay, so Nikki, I guess you and I are in the
I didn't
the
either.
exception here. Oh, you didn't? Okay, so I'm the odd man out then.
Did you think
All right.
you thought you would work for one?
I just feel very fortunate that I did. I mean, I've
Yeah.
always had the same logo on my card, but I've
Yeah.
had a million different jobs and
Yeah,
did
I
it at
can
a lot
say,
of different
yeah.
places. Yeah. Yes, sir. You had you're next.
Yeah, so I know that some large companies, and before we mentioned P&G, seem to manage the balance between improving the efficiencies today to make money today with the need to innovate to make money tomorrow by adopting some of the design thinking methods, which seem to be an integration between the analytical thinking you need on the efficiency side and the kind of intuitive thinking you need on the creativity side. Do you have any experience with that? And if so, what is your opinion about this design method?
So I guess the question is, do you deploy design thinking in your innovation processes?
So
Wanna start?
I'm actually a proponent of design thinking. Of course, my career is in innovation, so I consistently ask the what if question. But when you ask the what if question and you're trying to say, well, what if we, I'll make this up. What if we could pay with our, sunglasses and just by, whatever, switching it from dark to light, right? You had some sort of polarized, so you were in a store and you're paying, right? Like I could ask that question all day, but what problem am I solving, right? Probably none. But it might be a cool way to do something, right? So if you step back and do design thinking and you kind of really sit there and say, not only just what if, but you reframe the problem. So what's the problem there? You can't pay because, I don't know, people lose their sunglasses all the time, and so you want to come up with something else. You need to reframe it. And so the example I gave this morning actually about design thinking was an elevator story. You may have heard this. If you haven't, I'm happy to share it with you. But it was really about slow elevators, and everyone kept trying to figure out how much money they would invest to make these elevators faster. They were going to lose their tenants. And the design thinking story, which happened to be a Penn State student who came up with this, said, you know what? The problem isn't that the elevators are too slow. The problem is that people are bored. And so he put in mirrors, which cost like $500. And now if you look around at elevator banks, they're covered in mirrors because people would look at themselves and they didn't realize how long the elevator was taking. So I think, personally, that there's a place for that, right? And then you should be using design thinking processes. You should be looking at problems and reframing them to a way that actually is meaningful. But you can't lose sight of the analytics, right? You need somebody who can actually turn that design process into something that's actually analyzed, quantitative, measurable, and usable.
I think
So-
you did some interesting things at the Olympics and the World Cup and so on with athlete payments and so
Oh
on.
yeah, we did lots of fun things, but
Yeah.
that kind of gets back to scale, right? So I have the opportunity to do things for a limited time and kind of do some really cool cool new way to pay. But one of the things we learned, and if you don't mind me giving a little anecdotal study, when we had the Olympics in Rio, we actually had a payment wearable, right? It was a ring, and we gave it to clients and athletes and a bunch of different people, and we said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if people can just go pay with their ring? It wasn't something we had done before. Basically, it was a new form factor if you think about the way that you pay. It wasn't a card and it wasn't a phone. It was, what we term a wearable. And it was great. And then after the Olympics, everyone wanted this ring. And, we're not a merchant, and we're not even a bank. Like, we don't issue the card. PNC issues the card, or whoever. So people come to me and they'd say, okay, we really, really, really need these rings. And I was like, what do you want me to do? Like, manufacture a ring? Like, but it was a huge lesson learned,
Yeah.
right? And so you could do that. But then when we came to the World Cup, which was last summer in Russia, same thing. Everyone needed a ring. And we said, okay, what can we do this at scale? Can we do this so we make it available for the general public? And that was a whole new process, right? Now we're doing innovation at scale, which really is a product. And then you need to have a whole reliable product there, and you have to be able to sell it or what have you. And so we partnered with a bank in Russia, and we actually had rings and we had bands, and people could go to the customer service booth and buy a ring, and it had, you know, money loaded, as much money as they want loaded on it, and they could go to an ATM to check their balance, and it was like a prepaid card, only it was a ring
Different
or a
form
band
factor.
or what have
Very
you.
cool.
So
Yes. Let's start up at the back with Lee. Yeah.
So I would kill to have amazing mentors like you when I was GE years ago. So how do students connect themselves with smart people like yourself and be able to suck every bit of knowledge out of you?
Come to events like this.
In the workplace, right? Creating those relationships that will last.
I mean, I think a big part of it is, you know, find a mentor or mentors at the organizations that you end up working for.
okay, I can take a stab at that. So working in a large company, a lot of times they have mentor programs. Like, I kid you not, just like you have and sometimes what that means is you don't actually have a mentor, right? But still, they have mentor programs, right? So you sign up as a mentor or a mentee or both, and you know, you get assigned somebody, and you can do it that way. And that might be an opportunity, but I think you also have to find a champion, and you're not going to find your champion through a mentor program. So you need to actually kind of put yourself out there a little bit, which is uncomfortable, but, you know, hey, you know, I listened to you speak at this event. Would you mind having coffee with me one day? You'd be surprised at how much people love to talk about themselves or their careers. And so, as you can see, I haven't stopped talking. So, you know, and then they're like, wow, oh, okay. And then you go meet with them, and they'll say, not only is that a good idea, but actually, do you know so-and-so? Or let me make an email introduction for you. And they may never talk to you again because you have nothing in common, but now you've met this other person who you really connect with and, you know, have an opportunity to do it. So you have to put yourself out there a little bit. Nobody really likes, or I should say nobody, but most people don't like to network. But if you do, and you take the bad with the good, you may find that you really find a huge network that you can depend on.
So I'm going to add on to what you said, which is awesome. First of all, LinkedIn is a great way to find people, especially Penn State alums. Inside companies, there are leaders who get known as being great mentors. So I always had like a stable of younger professionals that I was trying to work with to, like, if I could give them three great things a year, I felt like I would really hit the jackpot. But it's all about building trust. And to your point, it's like you have to make the first step. As the student or as the young professional, you have to be the person who reaches out. And I know, you know, that might not be comfortable, but, you know, I've met students almost every time I speak that I still keep in touch with from, you know, they graduated 5 years ago. And that's because of them. That's really not because of me. So if you want a mentor, and you should have a mentor, you know, you got to put yourself out there a little bit.
I did absolutely fantastic advice. You know, you're not going to find many leaders that will look out into the crowd to find the quietest person, you know, and say, hey, can we have coffee? It's not going to happen that way that much. So, you know, really, I can't tell you how many, you know, I think the most important part of my job is the personnel part of my job. It's helping my team, it's setting direction, it's mentoring, it's all of that. And you know, if you're not spending half your time, I believe, as a leader doing that, you're probably not really doing your job to the extent that you could, because the multiplier effect is absolutely amazing. So don't be afraid, go out there. I mean, I'm easy that way, I think. You know, people say, hey, you know, I saw this, I saw that. You wanna have coffee, or can I have 15 minutes of your time? Of course. I don't think I ever say no. And then there's a lot of people that are like me. So don't be afraid to ask. And the other thing is, what mentors are afraid of sometimes is a big, long commitment without a connection. So to the extent that you can test that out and see how it works, see if there's chemistry, see if you want a long-term relationship. You know, speaking to college students, you probably are in the middle of all that. You know how that will work or not work, but it's okay to have, you know, you have coffee, you make a connection, you get some advice, we learn something as well, and then you move on. Like, it's totally fine. You know, it doesn't have to be a long-term relationship. It may evolve to be, and that'd be great, but it doesn't have to be.
I think that's a great point. I mean, most people that are at our levels are more than happy to do it, but I really agree you have to respond to somebody reaching out to you. You're not going to go out in the crowd and find it. And I think programs are helpful, but not great, to be honest. So reach out to people that you look at, you admire, you say, I'd like to be doing what they're doing 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, and then figure out how they did it.
And see what they do that you like.
Yeah.
Like, if you were to come to someone and say, I saw you do this, and I love the way you presented, or I love the way you explain technology in very simple terms. I'd like to learn how to do that. Could you help me with that? Boom. I mean, you're in. I mean, just, you know, whatever it is that you see, you admire, you want to get better at, very purposeful discussion, I think, works.
I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then I think we're out of time. So let me go to the 2 gentlemen in the center at the back there, and then we'll break.
First off, thank you guys very much for taking time out of your day to give us valuable insight. I kind of seeking to get some advice, more or less a question. I've noticed that time is money, and time management is something that I wish I could be better at. And in your positions, I'm positive that time management has to be exceptional. So could you possibly offer whatever you can offer on how to get better at it, manage better, or just anything around it?
Okay, so the question was, I'm not sure any of us have the answer, but the question was, you know, how do you get better at managing your time in a time-starved world? So,
Let me frame it a little bit better. So from, I see myself as a hopefully eventually entrepreneur, so maybe towards that direction.
yeah, and I think there's an element of life balance in there too that's important.
So I think it depends on the person, right? I happen to be a procrastinator, right? So the less work I have to do, the longer it takes me to get it done. But when I'm super busy, or the more time I have something to do, the longer it takes me to get started. And then when I get started, I think, oh God, if I'd only done this 3 months ago, I would have been so far ahead. So I think you have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then you have to adjust it. So since I know I'm a procrastinator, I know that the busier I am, the easier it is for me to manage my time, as opposed to having extra time and just fitting it in. But what doesn't work for me really is sort of a schedule. So I have a to-do list. I do need to have a to-do list. But it's not like, today I'm going to do this and tomorrow I'm going to do that. I work better when I'm like, I got to get all these things done, and I can really focus on each one and balance it, right? So that's another part that you really have to be thoughtful about, is how much of this is work that I need to do? How much of this is work that I could do in a different way? You know, how much of it has to really be done today, and how much can wait until, you know, the next day? And you really have to kind of think about the way that you manage your time, and then figure out where you get rewards from too. Because sometimes you get sucked in, and then all of a sudden you've missed lunch and you missed dinner and you missed going out with your friends and whatever because you waited too long. So how do you plan your day out in a way so that you can, you know, take a break and refresh and regenerate and move on? But you have to try a lot of different things, and a lot of different things work for a lot of different people in different ways.
Okay, Nikki?
Oh, I
Quick-
don't
quick
know.
hit.
I'm not that great at it. I feel like I'm missing stuff at work right now. My daughter's a basketball player. She's got a bum shoulder, so she's texted me. You know, I feel guilty. And I think, you know, that'll happen to you. It probably happens now. It'll happen more as life gets more complicated. I waited, just a personal tidbit, I waited until I got my MBA. I was 10 years out of Penn State before I had kids, because I was afraid that once I have kids, like, I don't know that I'll be able to manage it all and achieve what I wanted to achieve. So life is a great balance. I guess the only advice I can give you is don't beat yourself up, that, you know, you're doing the best you can. Keep trying little things to get better, and, you know, play the long game, which to me means there will be days like today where I get to enjoy doing something like this with you all, and I'm not with my kids or my husband, and I'm not doing work or acting with my community. But you know what? I've got a weekend planned, and we took a spring break. You know, so it's playing the long game. And I tell my kids, you know, tell me, you know, I'm not going to be able to be at every single game. Tell me the important ones, and I'll mark them right down in Sharpie on my calendar, and like I won't miss those. You know, so it's about some calendar management and just knowing that you're going to have days where you feel like a failure at school, but maybe you had a good time at night, or maybe you're doing great in school, but you missed, you know, all sorts of fun. And that's going to happen. Just, you know, the longer term goals, I think, help me kind of keep myself straight.
Elizabeth, we'll give you the last word.
I think it's calendar management, and you've got to get the critical stuff personally, and if you have goals, work goals or school goals, you got to get time on your calendar for that, and you need to protect that time.
Yeah.
If we all did that, life would be a lot less stressful. It's easy for me to tell you, did I always do it? No. But when I did it, my life was a lot more organized.
Can I just say, don't forget yourself
Yeah.
and your health. I mean, always put yourself first in terms of your own mental and physical well-being, because if you don't have that, you have nothing.
So we're going to break it there. Don't leave yet because I have some instructions for you. But first of all, let me thank our panel and ask you to thank us. Nikki, Francine, Elizabeth, great job.